So if you have been following along with us, you know where we've been hovering. In the next 2 to 3 weeks of this, because we'll end it in about 3 weeks. Well, we won't end prayer, but we'll end primarily talking about prayer. Actually, we won't. We're just going to talk about it in a different context. But we're shifting into stage 2 of this. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of a recap, and I'm going to take you, and I'm going to show you something that if you pay attention, it's going to be like, oh, I'm getting it. If you do not, you're going to mistake what's being said this week and next week, and you're going to reject it. So I need you to intently listen. There's a movie that came out not too long ago, Telnet, I think is what it is. Has anybody seen it? It's a really mind-bender movie. Okay, fine. Here's one everybody knows, Inception. Do y'all not know the movie Inception? Y'all need to watch some movies. God speaks through some movies. Some. But think of it like that. You ever watch those mind-bender movies that you're watching it the whole time and you think you know what's going on, and then at the very end it's like, wait, what? And you got to like rewatch the movie, and every time you watch it you get something little, yeah. That's kind of like what God's written word is like. It is like a mind-bending, reality-shaping concept that you read it once, it's just like, okay, wait, what? That doesn't really make much sense. But you watch again, you're like, oh. And it's like, you know what humanity has like just been overly interested in? Who has ever seen a Marvel movie? All right, who has ever lied? Okay, now we're getting participation. Marvel pioneered, really, I mean, it was kind of existing, but I mean, they pioneered this idea of putting Easter eggs in their movies and a post-credit scene Easter egg. If you don't know what I'm talking about, basically what they did, brilliant if you think about it, in the movie, they placed all kinds of things, whether it be background scenes or phrases, just things that on first glance of watching and looking, you'd never get it. And then at the very end, after the credits have all rolled and everybody else normally left, then they have a little like 3-second scene to 30-second scene. Sometimes they're the pointless scene. They're just like eating shawarma, no point. But there's a scene, and that scene is telling you what's coming. And then it's like, wait. Did you see? And I remember after the first several Marvel movies came out, and Taryn and I went to see one of the other ones. It was like right when they were really starting this Easter egg thing. And so the movie's over. And like 5 people are getting up and starting to walk away, and then more people, and we're just sitting there like, no, there's got to be something. Because I love trying to figure out Easter eggs. And we're sitting there. I'm like, man, how many people does it take to make a movie? And you're just watching all the scenes. And as those people got up, they were like, wait, is there something supposed to happen? And they start sitting back down, and everybody waits. And to this day, if someone, well, not now, Marvel sucks now, but they used to be good before they went woke. Now they're going broke. But leave all that aside. So... But used to, people would literally sit and wait for like 20 minutes of credits just to see 3 to 5 seconds because it may give us a little bit of a clue. They stole that idea from Scripture. They probably wouldn't tell you that because they probably don't even know that. But that's the idea of the written words of God, is that you look through it once, and he's given us all the Easter eggs, no pun intended about Easter and Christ, okay? But he's given us all these Easter eggs. It's like you go back and you read it again, you're like, oh. I see. We use the term meditation on this, not Middle Eastern meditation. Meditation meaning to replay over and over again, say it over and over again, hover over it. There's an interesting thing about that. This is just for people who are currently paying attention. Here's an Easter egg. There's a very similar word used in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God, what you would say is moved, but the word there is hovered, which is the root word to meditate. From the beginning, the Spirit of God was protecting, leading, guiding, meditating over all of his creation. Now, before I tell you the new thing, we need to establish something very, very clear about Jesus. And I'm going to say something that is going to tick Christian people off. Probably not most of you, but some of you maybe. So who is this dude, Jesus? Probably hands down most famous person to have ever existed. Just hands down. Like as far as known thing, he's kind of been top of the charts for thousands of years. But yet, in that, very, very little could actually tell you many about what his real plan purpose was. The church commonly is a church that can tell you about Jesus and about a message Jesus, the message about Jesus. But they can't tell you the message Jesus taught. Many people could tell you, and I could stand up here and you could just Google on YouTube, gospel sermon about Jesus, and they can tell you a whole lot about and a message all about Jesus, but they could not tell you the message that Jesus himself was teaching. And it's because we haven't meditated on the word. We haven't looked at what he was saying and trying to get across. Jesus did not come to set up a new religion. That was not his goal. He didn't come to be a moral teacher. That was not his main goal either. And when you frame up Jesus as simply trying to give you good moral guidelines, the good news of Christ becomes just good advice that you may want to reorder your life around. Someone right now is like an epiphany moment. That's exactly how people think about Christianity. It's a religion that gives you really good moral advice that makes your life work out better. And so that's what Jesus came to do, was to give you more morals. And so now good news of Christ becomes just good advice about your life that you may or may not order your life around. And then as culture changes, guess what changes? The good news. Because it's just good advice. And the advice changes over time. I mean, right? Like, hey, women can't have your hair uncovered. It's just good advice. And so it changes. Now, that has nothing to do with the gospel, but I'm using it as an example. Things that are cultural and good advice and moral in that regard will shift and change. And so we have to reframe up Christ much different. See, the modern Christian view of Christ is this. I'm saying it calmly because if I get really excited, I may yell and scream and act a fool. Up in here. Okay. The modern Christian view of Christianity and of who Jesus the Christ is puts him down to nothing more than pavement I walk on to get to a place I desire to go. That is all Jesus is needed for. He is simply pavement that I get to walk on to get me to a place I desire to go. And I have news for you. My view of Christ is that I need Christ even after this life. And if Christ is framed up simply as a way that now you're getting somewhere you think you want to go, you have missed who he is. Now he's not eternal. Now he was just a dude giving good advice. This is a huge category mistake of the modern church, which is why we can't convince people and compel people anything about who Jesus was, because that's how we're framing him up. I told you it could tick some people off. This will not be a little sermon clip we post on. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we're going to. We already got some trolls that don't like us, so why not keep ticking them off? Did you hear me? Jesus is supposed to be the central piece of everything we do. Look at, observe, understand. But more often than not, he sits just outside of view as simply a connecting dot that makes it all possible. Who's ever heard Jesus makes it all possible for you to communicate with Spirit of God? Yeah. And it's like, true statement. But if that's where you leave it at, you've missed the wholeness of who Jesus the Christ is. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to answer all that today for you. I just want you to meditate on that as we're saying be more like him. We probably need to know what message he was coming to teach, because he wasn't trying to set up a religion. If Jesus today came here and said, hey, and we were like, oh yeah, Jesus, like we're all Christians. He'd be like, well, you're a what? He'd be like, Christians. He wouldn't know the word because the word didn't come to him much after him. Now, he's a pretty brilliant guy, I think, so he probably put two and two together because he knew the language and, whatever. And if someone, I'm just going to keep doing it until people really, I want someone to go home and just like spend their whole week researching Jesus. It'd be an amazing week. If you ask Jesus, what are you? He'd say, I'm a Jewish guy. And modern Christians, they'd be like, you're not Jewish. He'd be like, yeah, kind of am. Born in that area. Like I'm ethnically Jewish, as well as I abide by Jewish customs. And modern Christians would be like, you don't have to abide by those, Jesus. He'd be like, who taught you? Because it wasn't me. So we need to go back and figure out what he was all about. And we can't frame him up into one thing. Otherwise, he becomes pavement to walk on. You don't need him afterwards. And I'd like to just point out one other thing about your view of where you think you're trying to get. I taught a message on it called The Puzzle of Paradise, so if you'd like to watch it, you can. I mean, if you think about the self-centric nature of how modern Christianity is portrayed, it is, I am here and life is not the way I want it to be. Who agrees there's a problem in the world? Yeah. It's like, it ain't the way it's supposed to be. Who agrees humanity is like the problem? Like, all right, storms and stuff like that, but humanity is the evil, and is like that's a problem. We all agree on that. And so then we take from that view and say, we agree on that. And we take a concept of, I don't want it to be this way. And we took a concept that was much deeper, much more fulfilling, much more freedom, much more of everything, and we boiled it down to, so do you want to get to a really good place? Yes. Okay, there's this really good place that you can get to go to if you do XYZ things. The XYZ things, say this prayer, do this thing. There was this guy who made that way, and so here's a path to get you where you want to go. Now, does that sound Christ-centric and God-centric, or does that sound you-centric? It is a you-centric theology or a meology. It is about where I am and where I dislike and where I want to go. And I want to go there by any means, and someone's telling me there's a mean to go to this place. Everything about that is business, transactional, me-centric. And the gospel message is much deeper than that, and it is a relational message. And so I'll just say this place that you call heaven is not a place, it's a person called God. If God is all present, all knowing, and all powerful, but let's focus on the all present idea, can there be a place that exists where he is not? That would violate the core characteristics of who we believe God is. So you cannot have heaven that God dwells in. You have God, and you need nothing else. So when we use phrasings like streets of gold and all of this concept, we are trying to frame up what the fullness would be like that we understand here in a framework that begins to show us the grandeur of what it would be like to be face to face. I used this example with some students just a few days ago. Guys, I don't know what y'all do when your kids have friends stay over, but now I can count at 3 or 4 times that my kids have had friends over, and their friends and they're sitting at the table talking about spiritual things, and then their friends are asking me questions, recording conversations, drawing out diagrams of how spiritual things work, and they're like, can I show this to my parents? I'm like, your parents may not let you come over anymore, but yeah. And I was having this conversation with them about this entire concept. And if we look at our framework of heaven as this place, you're bypassing the whole relationship. And so what all those descriptions are like, you're like, that's what it's like to be in person. And here was the example I used. Who has ever used a cell phone before? Some of you are currently using it right now, and it ain't to take notes or follow along. Cell phones. Done that. Who's ever texted somebody before? Raise your freaking hand because y'all all text me and I don't respond. I hate text messages. Yeah. Amen. It's the only amen I get. Jonathan, shut up. Who's ever texted someone? Who's ever called someone, like talked to them on the phone? Who's ever FaceTimed, like video conference with somebody? And then who's ever been with someone face to face? There in and of itself is a very natural concept and idea of what we are trying to do when we're describing eternity versus now, but yet God is still currently present. It is like right now, there is somehow barriers and things, and it's like text messaging. It's not quite as intimate. That's what Scripture is. It's like a text message. But there's something a little deeper than that. Like you can have a phone call. You can even FaceTime. And who's been FaceTiming with someone? Like, so I had to go on trips frequently. And Taryn and I have been married 16, almost 17 years now. And throughout our entire marriage, we've done a lot of work together. We've had businesses together. We do this stuff together. So we're together a lot. So for us, when there's like a trip for 2 or 3 days, it's very odd for us not to be together. So there's an extreme, I don't know what to do if I don't have my wife around, and then secondarily my kids. I can get by without my kids. That'd be kind of cool. Matter of fact, the other night they were like off with friends. I'm like, this is awesome. Love you guys. But I don't really know. I've been doing it for so long together with her that when she's not around, I don't know what to do. And if she's ever gone and I'm at the house, self-destruct mode comes into play. I'll stay up till 4 a.m. doing dumb things like playing Age of Empires. Someone's like, Age of Empires? Yeah, from the 90s. Like, I'm like researching on the internet to find the old games because the new ones suck. I want 2-dimensional guys. I get confused when I see all the extra stuff. And I'll just go on self-destruct mode with it because I'm so used to being with her. And so then we FaceTime and there's, have you ever done it? And like there's smiles like, oh, I see you. But then there's also this internal angst of like, that's not the same as seeing you. Face to face. It's just not quite the same. Who would agree? Yeah. That's kind of the concept of what the relationship with God is like. And the idea is that prayer bridges these gaps. Now, who has ever had your cell phone and you're trying to call someone or text someone or FaceTime, and you're trying to use it for cellular data of some sort, and it says you have signal, but it is not working? Isn't that so frustrating? You don't know who to get mad at. You're mad at the phone, and then someone like me comes along and tells you it's not the phone, it's the service provider. And they're like, well, why don't they? And then, they try to explain it to you, and you don't care. Because you're just angry that it says it's supposed to be working. Who even gets angry when it says no signal, and you still try to use it? Like, it's telling you it ain't gonna work. But you're like, no, I'm gonna use this. If they don't see my Facebook post of this food, the world will come to an end. Everybody's gotta know what I ate. I don't know, guys. Now, let me educate you slightly. This will help you with your cell phone use, but this is primarily to show you spiritually. There is something called the SNR equation, which is signal to noise ratio. This is how all wavelengths of radio waves work. From AM radio all the way to your 5G and your 8G that I was told about by a crazy person. They're skipping all the other Gs and they're putting 8Gs in clear phones and they're going to invade your mind. Like, I had crazy conversation. People that I talked to, they're skipping 6 and 7. Going to 8. 8's bad. I thought it would be 6. And then they're going to go to 666 Gs. There we go, guys. Okay. The point of this is there's this thing called a signal to noise ratio. And what it is you can have signal on a frequency, something happening. But if there are other things happening on that frequency, the noise level has to be less than the signal level. If the noise is the same as the signal, it does not matter how loud that signal is coming through, you will not be able to understand it because they're equal. And so there's a ratio of where the noise has to be different than the signal, and it's got to be enough difference that it does not interfere with the communication. Does that make sense? So it's like if you had two things, here's volume level. Right now, I'm talking on this microphone. Why can you hear me so clearly? It's not because of how loud it is. I could turn it off. And everybody in this room is quiet, and you can still hear me, yes? But if I was to get the band back up here, and I'd say, all right, Daniel, waylay them drums, brother. And I said, hey, Caleb, play that piano. Turn it up to 100%. By the way, we keep it at like 50. Hey, Ron, get on that guitar, but throw some distortion on that sucker. I want to rock. Julia, Ann, we're turning up the volume. We're going to make all the volumes equal because everybody's important. Everything is important. You got to hear it all. And then they all began to play, and I began to talk at the same volume. Would you be able to hear me, yes or no? Why? Turn it up, Jared. You're too quiet. No one's ever told me that. Oh, what is it? It's the level that I was speaking was the same, but all this other stuff started getting to the same level, and then it blended in with everything else. And I submit to you that that is your communication with God. That is your life right now. When you look at how we do all this music, have you seen me walking around with the iPad? Sometimes I'm looking up scriptures, something came to me, but sometimes it's because something's like really loud. And so I have a little thing, and it has all these little fader knobs that go up and down, and I can turn each thing down. The crazy thing is even though you want to hear everything, everything is not the same importance. If I was to have, I wish I should have brought 3 glasses up here, but imagine I have 3 containers, and one represents something in your life. Each one of them does. And I have 3 containers. And I said, balance them. What would we all do? Pour the same amount in each one, right? Because that's balance. No, it's not. That's equality. There's a difference. Equal means to be the same. Balance means to be weighted. Did y'all not know that? Okay, let me help you out. The word balance in the English dictionary means to be weighted properly. And equality means when that weight is the same. So if I took those 3 glasses and I filled one up and I filled one at 50% and then the other one was empty and I said, that is balanced, you may be perplexed and say, what? No, it's not, Jared. It's not equal. And you'd be correct. It's not equal. But it is balanced because, see, if those represent things in my life, there are certain things in my life that are more valuable than other things. For instance, who's ever had this problem? You have X number of bills and you have minus X number of dollars. You ain't got enough money to pay the bills that came in. Let's use easy numbers like $1,000. Oh, wouldn't it be nice to only have $1,000 worth of bills? I have $1,000 worth of bills, gas money. But $1,000 worth of bills, and you got $850. What do? You don't give a little bit to everyone. You say, what's the most important thing? And you decide. Some people it's different. You decide and say, well, maybe it's my house. Can't lose that. So you pay that. Some other people may say, no, it's food. I'm going to buy food first because we can live with somebody else. Some people will say, I got to have my internet. But then the internet, you also have to have power, so you'd have to pay both of those. Do you see? So you choose not to equally distribute money across your budget. You choose to do what? Balance it. That's actually what it's called, balancing your checkbook. What is it? You are weighing out what's there, what's not there, how much has been taken out, and it's based off of, in your spiritual life, value. And so rises prayer and who Christ is to the surface. If we were to take your life and put it in little containers and we said, hey, balance this, What most of us try to do is equal everything out. Give a little bit of time to God, a little bit of time to family, little time for me time. Oh, a little bit more time for me time because that person wears me out. And we give a little bit of time here. Well, I got to go to birthday parties, so I give a little bit of time to birthday parties. And then I also got to go. I got to go to birthday parties, but then I also have to host my own birthday parties, of course. That's a big deal. Best day in human history, second best day. Well, I got to fit in my shows. Got my shows here. Got to have a job. Put that here. Got to have, what else? If you have a spouse, maybe you have date nights. And you try to equally balance your time across everything. And who feels like I just described your life and it is hurry and hectic and chaos? You want to know why? You are trying to equalize your life instead of balance your life. You're not taking into equation value level and then what makes the top of the list. There are some things that just don't get any attention. They may be super important for someone else, but it doesn't rise in my value level. For instance, responding to your text messages is not in my value level. Do you want to know why? I'm not saying don't text me and I'll never respond. Okay, hear this. I'm trying to show you something. Because I value face-to-face. There are some people in this room that have figured that out. That if you text me, I will not respond. But if you call me or you say, can we talk? We end up sitting and talking for an hour or two or something like that. I value face-to-face conversation. So if you want to talk to me, that's what it is. Texting does not, my view of it is, if it's important enough, you will talk to me the next time you see me or you will call me. For me, text messaging is the lowest form of communication. I'm not saying you have to agree. I'm trying to use an example. Do y'all see that? Someone's like, he's trying to tell us, I'm not. Texting is the devil, Bobby. No, I'm trying to use an example, okay? And because in my value system, it's lower down the line. But when you try to equalize life, it gets very blurry, very hurry, very messy. And then you seem stressed out, wore out. And so you find yourself, spiritually speaking again, because I'm here to talk to you about your spiritual life. I don't care what else you value after that. But it's supposed to be the thing that's the most full. I didn't say your church life. That may be contained within that. I said your spiritual life, your walk with Christ. And so we find ourselves typically being so stressed and thinned out that we come and we give half of what we should be giving. We're not really there. And then we come in wondering, God, why can't I hear you? Prayer's not working. I know some of y'all are saying this, well, Jared, and I told you this from week 1. I was about to say a very derogatory word. Dumb person. I told you from day 1. So y'all are going to get a couple weeks in, but it's not working, Jared. It hasn't changed me yet. Y'all are going to get 6 weeks. It's not working. It hasn't changed. Hasn't changed something yet. But what it is you're trying to still equalize your time. And so then when you come in, everything is equal in your mind. So the noise level is super high. And God is speaking because God is consistent, unchanging and unwavering from the dawn of time. So he's still speaking just like he always was, but you've turned up the volume of everything else equal to it. So then when you finally give it time, because there's a balance level there of value, then you finally say, okay, I'm going to give a couple minutes. But the volume of everything else is still super high. And so God is drowned out in the noise. Do you see how uncomfortable we are with silence? Just that little pause there for a second. After about 2 seconds or so, everybody's like, what's he going to say next? Come on, is he going to say, did he forget? Or what was happening? We're uncomfortable with it. So much to the point now, what do? People, I got to have something on while I'm going to sleep. Now again, is that inherently a spiritual issue? No, I'm just trying to show you. We've turned the volume up of everything. It's a big argument in the day whenever I was a student. Everyone, because I grew up in a household that we were people who did this. We served the house of God. We did church. It doesn't make us any more holy. That's just like our job, you know? It's like, who's more important? The person who picks up your trash, you know, and drives the truck, or the person who picks up the trash, or the person who pays the bills? Like, you need all of them. So when I say this, don't say that. But there was a big thing is because I grew up in the church. And when I say I grew up in the church, I quite literally mean I spent more time in this physical building than I did at my own house more often than not. And there was this thing that came around about how God wants you to have a good life, which is true, but not at the cost of his will, plan, and purpose. So I leave that alone and we continue on. That the argument was, but you got to live a balanced life. And what they meant was equalize your life because it doesn't make sense to give all to this thing. But if it's a relationship, I give you the same example I've given every single week. Imagine, say, if you're not married, imagine you're married. If you are married, imagine you want to be. Okay. Imagine you're married and someone came up to you and said, you're doing your relationship all wrong. You got to live a balanced life. It can't be all about that relationship. Who would be like, what crack pipe are you smoking? That's not how it works. Who? Yeah. It's not all about your spouse. It's not all about your family. You got to be balanced. Who would think that person is ludicrous? Or better yet, I'll give you the real example I use. Imagine you're about to get married when you already got married if you were, or you're thinking, hey, I'm going to get married someday. And you're standing there and the person says, hey, but by the way, I'm going to make sure I live a balanced life with you. So Friday through Sunday is my day because it's not all about this. I know we just said death do us part and all that. That doesn't matter. That's bull. This is a balanced life. It's what makes me happy. And so we equalize everything, and it actually causes our own death, chaos, and destruction and hurry. The guy named Dallas Willard says it this way, and I love it. He says, hurry is not a tool of the enemy. It is the enemy. It's not a tool of the enemy. It is the enemy. To recklessly eliminate hurry and equalization and say, no, I will do a balance. And if what we claim about God and Christ is true, we must rebalance and stop equalizing. Scripture has this way of trying to help us understand how to bring up the signal and bring down the noise and do this and how to, right? Like how to do it. The world has tried to steal it. And when I say the world, I don't mean evil, bad people necessarily. I mean people who are actually seeking for the truth, but because we don't know it, we can't tell them it. And so then they pull things that are actually God things and just reuse them for their own purposes. And it's this right here, solitude. Now, solitude is different than another word that you may confuse it with, which is seclusion. Or recluse. Who's ever said, oh, they're a recluse. Or, oh, they're just secluding themselves. But solitude is much different. They carry the same things, ideas. But solitude is not from a place of shame, hurt, or anything like that. Solitude is from a place of reevaluation. Now, the word solitude is not used in your ancient text, but there's another way it says it. In Psalms 46:10. Psalms 46:10 is a prayer that is given to us, and it says this right here. It says, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Now, I am a very energetic person. I do not like to sit still at all, ever. People make fun of me still to this day in my mid-30s when I'm sitting down for any length of time. My legs going or my hands are tapping. I've gotten better at it because my son now annoys me with that. And so I'm like, that's me. Oh, God, I got to stop doing that. I was told so many times, Jared, hush, be still. Jared, stop, be still. Who's ever been told that when you were a kid? Of course, nowadays, I think kids are like, get up. And parents are like, get up off the couch, you lazy bum. But there's something about this be still. Notice it doesn't say be still and center yourself and find yourself. By the way, just real quick, I'm just going off here for a second. See, my foot's getting going. When I get excited, I'm going to try to stand still when I say this. No, I'm not. Notice it didn't say, be still and center and know thyself. Any person who's claiming Christ and says, I got to get to know myself and love myself is the biggest piece of bull that I've ever heard. Because it ain't about you knowing who you are. I can give you a hint. It sucks. It's about who he is and who he has created you to be. Because to say that I got to learn how to love myself is to say that the love that God is and has poured out is not enough. And so I need some more. And the ultimate act of evil is to consume the love that you have on yourself instead of pouring it out to others. So notice that is not what it says. It says, be still and know what? That he is God. Know who he is. Know his will, plan, purpose, character. Know that and settle into that. Turn down the volume of everything else and be still and know that. If you know nothing else in life, just know that. Be still. Rebalance the equation and turn down the noise of everything else and put your value here and be still, solitude, and know. Now, Jesus had this prayer posture, this rhythm, this fidelity. Jesus had this. And we see it time and time again. If you've ever read through the story of Jesus, this is what he does. He goes into solitude. I love one of the ways that, has anyone ever seen episodes in The Chosen or anything? I love the way they depict Jesus is like always gone, and his disciples are like, he's praying somewhere, he just disappears like this, and he's off, and they know what he's doing, but no one knows where he's at. If you've ever watched it, it's a pretty, I kind of like how they portray it that way, because I like my Jesus, like that. It's kind of what I imagine when he says, sometimes he tells them like, I'm going to pray. And they're like, okay, how long? He doesn't say. And he's gone in these deep times of solitude, where he's praying. He's being still and knowing who God is and letting that be the thing. He's turning the volume up to 10 and he removes everything else. It doesn't even go to 50. He goes 0, 0, 0. None of this matters. This goes up to 100. I'm going to set in this. This is what Jesus did. And then he comes out of that deep solitude between just him and God, and then he moves back into normal realms of society. And when he does, he approaches it so radically different that we're all sitting here this morning talking about it. Think about that. The manner of life that he did after coming out of this solitude, this be still, this turning up the volume, this getting the signal right, the way that he responded to the death, chaos, and destruction in this world was so radically different that thousands of years later, the ripples are still echoing throughout humanity. And he does all these crazy things, from radical physical miracles to saying things that are baffling the wisest people of the day, to speaking directly into someone's heart and soul. And what he's doing after that is he tries to take them with him into this place of very deep community. And then he comes from that place of community, and guess what he does? He goes back into solitude, turns down the volume of all that, turns and cranks up. Be still, know who God is, be there, know his will, plan, and purpose. And then what does it do? It carries him back into the society that he's in. While the noise is going up, he can still pick it out. And then he goes into a deep place of community. Next week, we're going to talk about the deep place of community. Today, we're talking about the deep place of solitude. And if we look at this rhythm and pattern of Christ, he's in solitude, turning up the volume to 100, turning everything else out down to 0. And then he comes into the society, reacts totally different because he's tuned in to that 100% when the volume gets turned up, and he tries to take the people that he's interacting with into deep community so they can go into deep solitude, and they can become doing the same thing that he was doing. This is the pattern. You can see it. Jesus goes and prays. He goes to a person or a group of people, and then he goes to his disciples, and then he goes out to pray alone. Sometimes he takes his disciples, but it still tells us even when his disciples are with him, when he's ready for solitude, he still says, and he goes a little bit further away. This is the rhythm. This is the signal and noise. This is solitude. Be still and know who God is. Turn up that volume and turn down everything else. This is what Jesus is constantly trying to show us and trying to do. Now, I'm a musician. Singer. I've been doing it since I've lived around it my whole life. I've also been around a lot of recording. My dad used to do a lot of recording. I used to, and it's fun. If you're anyone who's a musician, once you kind of, all right, I learned my instrument, it's the first thing you want to do is like play it and record it and try to make something new, But there's something that happens. This happens to me all the time in the car with my wife, even my kids. See, I grew up being a musician. Who knows a musician? Well, you all know me. So. Have anyone ever wondered when they're listening to music and they're like, oh, did you hear that? And you're like, what? I hear music. This happens all the time to me. With Taryn, I'm like, oh man, here's a song. And I'm like, actually the song we were just singing today, I'm like, ignore the mix. She's like, what? I'm like, just the way that, just ignore it. We're going to do it slightly differently. And I turn it up. I'm like, oh, do you hear that? You hear how it's going from one side to the other? She's like, no. I'm like, do you hear the drums? And she's like, no, I just hear music. I'm like, you don't hear the drums? She's like, yeah, I hear drums, but I don't know what I don't know that sound you're talking about. I don't know how to identify it. If you just muted everything else, I could tell you. And matter of fact, when you're learning instruments and you're learning how to mix, that's what they tell you to do. They tell you to get your mix, and they tell you to mute everything else but the one thing you want to hear, so you can learn to identify that sound. To where when you turn on everything else, your ear can still identify that. That's how they teach you. Has anyone ever talked to someone who's like a painter? Jim is here, and I've heard him and Francis and people that are artists like that. I'm not that type of artist by any degree. Like y'all see, I got stick men drawn in my notes right now for an illustration. Like that's the extent of my artistry. I mean, Picasso, maybe I could just throw some stuff up there and be like, Jackson Pollock. But when you hear them talk, they look at a painting and they can tell you all kinds of things about it. About the gradient in the background and how they did the fading and what type of materials even used. They can describe all kinds of things. And when we look at it, what do we say? It's a painting. I see blue. I see red. I don't get why that's a big deal of how they did that. Like the Mona Lisa. Don't get it. She ain't even that pretty. Should have left Daniel on the drum so he could do-do-sh, because that's the best. Okay, so I don't get it. But yet you talk to someone who loves art, they're like, no, here's why the Mona Lisa was such a big deal. Because at the time and the perspective, they can describe all this stuff to you. And when us who are not trained in it, we just say, I see a painting of a lady. And that is what it's like with our conversations with God in prayer. Without solitude, you will be in your life with all the volume turned up of everything. You won't understand. You can't pick out his voice in it, which is the number one thing that everybody complains about, right? I pray, but I don't know how to hear God's voice. And we even teach lessons on it. 5 steps to hearing God's voice better. I'll give you 1 step. Turn everything else off. Just do that. You don't need any more steps. Because Christ promised us, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open. He said, just turn everything else off and start seeking me repetitively in solitude, and then you will be able to identify my voice 100%. Then when you go back into life with all the chaos, you're in all that chaos and you start to be a little more like Jesus. Every day I'm living more like Jesus. Because you can identify that. And you're like, I can still hear it. I said, do you hear that? Oh, I heard that little cymbal hit right there. Oh, I hear it. Oh, I see the painting. And then I can react in the manners that God has instructed me to in private. I can do it in this world. And now I'm bringing his kingdom. It begins to look more like what he's wanting. And then it draws me with the people that I've affected into a deeper place of community, a different type of community. We tend to call that church. And then what does it do? He says, now, come back, turn off the volume again. Go back. Turn off the volume of everything else. And sit and be still. And you'll be able to identify it. Then when you go into life, it is like the waves washing upon the shores. Right here in society is shallow things, shallow relationships, shallow experiences. Everything here is shallow. No real depth, no gravitas to it. And what Christ is urging us is to live in the depths. Not in social shallows, but to live in the depths of solitude between you and God, and turning the volumes off of everything else. Be still and know. And then when you pass through the shallows like a wave carrying the sand of people with you into a deep community that digs deep into the reality of what it's like. And then he says, now move back into solitude. Because if you stay in the shallows, only destruction is that way. And if you live totally in community, you'll still have the same noise and you'll start to be full of yourself. Or loathe yourself, one or the other. You want me to explain it a little bit more? I'll get a little bit more detail. This is how you have somebody that can stand up like what I'm doing right now and express to you truth that moves you to your very core. And you're like, whoa. And you could start looking at me too much. And if I don't go back to solitude, I start thinking that is me. I stop remembering where that came from. And then the more I do that, the less I understand about what God's trying to do. I get full of me, and then I start making decisions that I would make. And this is how you have pastors that are speaking such truth, but yet then it's like, wait, what? They did what? With the what? How is that possible? They were just speaking so much about this and that and the other, but yet they were cheating on their wives and doing what? How is that possible? Solitude. When a person standing in this position doesn't go to solitude, that's how it exposes itself. But when you, maybe someone who's not standing here, there's no hierarchy. It's not like I'm standing here and so I'm any different or better. It just expresses itself differently because of the role I have to play. But most of us, how it expresses itself is we become self-loathing and become victims, and because I can't hear God and and we go back to the self-centric version. That's why Christianity is painting it the way that it is. It's a self-centered version because there's no solitude. And you think that community is God, which is what we've told people church is. Haven't we? I'm saying we because I look around this room again and I see mostly people. What's the number one thing? Come on, guys, come on. I'm getting excited and you're not getting excited with me. What's the number one thing? When someone says, oh, do you believe in God or something? And they say, well, I haven't been to church in a while, or I go to church every Sunday. Well, I didn't ask you anything about church. I asked you about you and God. I asked you nothing of the community you're a part of. I asked you about your solitude with God. But this doesn't exist. So God gets replaced by community. And then that community is no longer centered on Christ. It's centered on us. And then it gets centered on our feelings. And it gets centered on what we can do to help each other out. It's like, is that a part of it? Sure, we're going to talk about that next week. But if there's no solitude, that can't happen. A quiet inner life of solitude is like the canvas that God can paint on. And if you're not quiet, you've already been painting all over that sucker. And God's like, well, okay. But he says, I won't edit it. I can use it, but you got to get into solitude. Quit. Turn off the volume. Stop the painting. And everything about our modern structure says this is boring. This is useless. This will not change anything. I got to go do something. Or, more often than not, we try to use prayer to avoid reality instead of using prayer to experience ultimate reality. Most of us, if you get quiet and alone for about 5 minutes, you're scared of what you may find. So what do? Distractions. Keep other things going. If we can keep those things going, we don't have to stop and let God seek and try us and start to show us, because most of you are scared of your own thoughts. And if you're honest with yourself, sometimes you're disgusted by your own thoughts. And you know, where did that thought come? No. Has anyone ever done that to yourself? Liars. Yes, you have. Some of you are doing it right now because I said thought no, and your mind went to the thought that you had, and shame starts to come in and everything else. And it's like, I don't want to just go somewhere else here, talk about something else. Let's do community. Let's sing. Let's do something else, because if I have to be quiet and sit right here, I'm not sure what I'm going to find. And God says, that's exactly where I want to be. Prayer is not trying to change things in the world. It's coming before God and saying, here I am. I know I got some messed up stuff, but I'm hoping that by being here, you're going to show it to me of what this looks like. Prayer is to change things in here, not out there. You are supposed to be the change out there. You're supposed to be here, God changing you. He takes you into society, and you begin to change society. And solitude is where it all starts from. Jesus had this pattern. Now in the wilderness, I'm almost done-ish. Now Jesus was in the wilderness, and what the wilderness means is a place where no people are. It doesn't mean desert. It just means a place where no people are. What is that called? Solitude. So anytime you see wilderness, 9 times out of 10, the word does not mean desert like you think. Y'all are thinking he was out on sand dunes. No, it just means a wilderness where there is no one else. It says he's out there. This is his first experience in the wilderness right after his baptism. And he's out there for 40 days. And while he's out there, he encounters 3 tests. And these 3 tests he overcomes. We're not going to go into them in extreme detail. But the first one is the test of natural substance, stones into bread, because he's fasting there in this time. The next one is to prove God, to prove that what he's putting his faith in is real, and to show it and to test God, to make sure. And then the third one is about control and bowing down to the will, plan, and purpose. Now, these are all tests that you will go through, and when you get into solitude, they're going to come up in differing ways, but you're going to experience similar tests. And we are given the playbook as to what the response is. If you notice very clearly in this story, if you haven't read it, every time that this test happens, the response is with Scripture. Every time. He responds with the written words of God through people in the past. And he says, this is my response. But how did he know that? Because he meditated on it. Did someone pray with him? No. Because he was in solitude with God. And then when the temptation came, he knew exactly how to respond. Then he knew how to respond in society and how to respond in deep, meaningful community. Psalms 46:10, be still and know. Most of us are extremely uncomfortable with quiet silence. Even if I was to speak in this kind of a cadence and leave breaths in it, we would all be like, ooh, I don't like it. Our world is filled with all the volume levels turned up, and balance them equal, give a little bit to everything. But what God is urging is that that's not how I work. You wouldn't accept that in a relationship with a husband or a wife. You wouldn't accept that in a meaningful friendship. He says, I don't accept that in mine. Prayer is the pathway of relationship. And without being still and knowing, without solitude, without just you and God. It's called sometimes contemplative prayer, meaning a meditation of quiet. You're not speaking, you're just sitting with nothing else and saying, here I am, God. I'm not trying to put before you how good I ought to be. I'm saying this is what's in here. Take it, shape it, shift it, mold it, make me into your image. Because that's what Christ did. And I only see hope down that path. We can not continue to use prayer to escape reality. We have to use prayer to begin to create reality. Oh, and I see someone just went like, oh, name it and claim it. No. Use prayer not as trying to escape and change this reality, but use prayer to create the reality that God wants, which is the spiritual reality. And that is done by getting in solitude with him, not going around and asking for things. That's going right back to trying to escape the reality that is. I'm going to be in this reality. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring about the reality that God wants in this realm, spiritual and natural together, which is what Christ did. He lived in that manner, which is why his responses were always perplexing to everybody, because he didn't respond the way the world said you're supposed to respond. He responded differently. And if Jesus needed solitude to walk out his mission, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure than I do. If Jesus needed prayer, one-on-one with God, to walk out his will, plan, and purpose that God had for his life, how much more? But how often, even in our prayer, do we ever give a moment to let God respond? Play me some worship music. I got to say something. Something's got to happen. And so, Jesus does this all the time, and the disciples see it, and they're confused by it. They see the way that Jesus is, and they're saying, okay, I get it. You're the Messiah. I get that's what, but you got to teach us how to do this. And in Luke 11 and in Matthew, I already looked at it in Matthew chapter 6. He gives them a prayer, because in Luke it shows as like the disciples ask him, they say, hey, teach us to pray like you pray. And see, what they were asking was not tell us some words that we can say. They said, there's something about the way that you pray, the way that you talk, there's something different. So Jesus gives them what we commonly call the Lord's Prayer. And if you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's a prayer of response. If you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's a template prayer. And it's also a prayer that they would have already known, just prayed slightly differently. And it's prayed in a very, very, very personal, relational, intimate way. The original prayer says something like, Adonai, our God, one, who reigns forever and ever. Establish your kingdom here. And it's spoken in a little bit of a different tone. And when Jesus turns and says it, he says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So when they're hearing this, they're like, this sounds similar, but there's such a closeness to it, like a relational thing. And what you got to understand is a little bit of this idea of Father being used was not the most common way to refer to God. The word there is the word Abba. The word Abba for father is kind of like saying dad. So my kids, sometimes they have a joke and they call me Father Lord. It comes from an anime TV show called Avatar. But my kids never call me father. Matter of fact, if they ever say father, they're always saying it in a joking manner, because why? Oh, father. Because in our culture, what does father mean? It doesn't necessarily mean relation. It just mean like father, like you had me somehow or another, sperm donor, whatever. But to say dad carries a little bit more gravitas. See, but for me, my kids, when they say Father Lord as a joke, there's relationship there. And I can only think about interacting with my dad. I remember one time, I was about Levi's age, I called my dad dude, and he about came unglued. I could call him dad. I could call him pastor. I could not use his name, Dwayne, at all. And I remember one time we were wakeboarding out on the lake. We were talking and we're all excited because I actually landed a trick instead of fall like I always do. I was not very good. And I was like, yeah, dude, and all the fun just, and my older brother even, I remember it, he's like looking at me like, oh, you're dead. And in the middle of all that, and my mom came unglued on him. They were like, is this real life? Or like, yeah, ministers are no different than you. And I said, dude, and he just turns, he was red from the sun, but like he just smoke coming out of his ears. He said, don't you ever call me dude again. And I was like, yes, sir. And then we're still there, and like the whole boat stays quiet. There was solitude in that moment. And I hear my mom saying, Dwayne, don't you get over there. He was just excited because he was like, no, don't you ever. He's not going to talk to me like that. He didn't mean anything by it. And they start getting invited. And it's like, lake day over. And we went home. And that's not God. As much as my dad's an awesome dad, that's not how God reacts to us. There's no distance like that. And what Jesus was trying to show him is that when you get in solitude and you have some personal time with him and stuff like that, you get this idea that there's a huge, deep, meaningful relationship that's there. And you can identify his voice and you understand who he is and his character. You can be still in that and just know who he is. And it starts to make everything else start to line up. It doesn't mean that it changes all the issues in life. He says, no, it makes you see what the issues are, how to walk around them, how to deal with them. Then when you get into that life, that volume level, everything else gets turned up, but I can identify it. I know it. He's right here. Now I react differently. There's this deep connection. And solitude is where it's found. And I submit to you, the answer to the modern church's problem, aside from their jacked up view of everything about Christ and what it's all about, aside from that, this is the biggest issue of the church. There is no prayer in the church. When I say the church, I don't mean in a service like this. I mean in the people professing Christ. There is no solitude of communication with God. There is no prayer where I am submitting my whole self, mind, body, soul, might, everything into it, where I am having fidelity, repetitious action, showing my devotion and trust and faith rhythmatically over and over and over again. And then in complete solitude, seeking and saying, all right, I'm just going to let you speak. And from that comes everything else. And so I submit to you, solitude is the thing that we're afraid of, that we don't want to do, and we're the most uncomfortable with. But yet in it lies the truth behind what prayer is, the truth behind a relationship with God. It is something that the early church understood, that Christ understood, and he tries to show it to us so many ways and so many times. So I ask you this week, bring solitude in. If you already have a prayer rhythm of life, keep it and add it in. If you don't, just start with that. Before you start trying, if you're like, I don't have a prayer life at all, Jared. Like, I think about prayer sometimes, and my prayer life consists of posting it up on Facebook, y'all pray for me, or something like that, or coming and running here and leaving snot everywhere and just asking you to pray for me. That's my prayer life. That's not a prayer life. That is a hookup. That is no different than going down to Harry Hines, picking up a prostitute, trying to get something real quick, and then going on about your way. And in that lies disease. Spiritually and naturally. And the church is diseased. Sex sells. I'm just using it in a different way. Okay. But in all truth, that's not a prayer life. Is there anything wrong with coming before? No. But start a prayer life, and before he's like, I don't know how to pray. Good. Just don't. Just go sit in silence. Nothing else. Turning off all the volume and just say, God, I'm here and I'm being still and I'm trying to know. And as your mind goes, just, nope, I'm being here still, I'm trying to know. And just because I know that you know that I know that you know, after 30 seconds, if right now I said, we're going to sit quiet for 10 seconds and I just said, ready, go. Or if I said 45, where you'd like maybe stop counting a little bit. After like 30 seconds of you saying, all right, I'm going to be still and know, it's going to be like, how long has it been? It hasn't even been a minute. Okay. Just set a timer on your phone. It's not about the duration, but just set a timer and be like, all right, I'm going to try 5 minutes. Like I waste 3 hours, on Facebook on the endless scroll. We'll give God 5 minutes. We'll just start with 5 minutes of silence. I'm not even trying to pray yet. Verbally, but you are praying. I'm just going to sit quietly, turn off everything. I'm going to set a timer on the phone, so I just know until that goes off, I can't move. I'm being still and knowing you're God. I don't know what this means, but I'm doing it. And just sit there. Do it. Once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. Do it. Say nothing else. And all you're doing is just turning down the volume. Now, I warn you, you may be confronted with things and you may realize some things. I venture to say some of you are going to break down emotionally in those moments and break down and immediately think about that song we were singing, praise be to God, you saved me from myself, because when I'm here and all that chaos and stuff like that, you've taken that. And in doing this is where the beginning of that starts.